And you are now live.
Thank you. This is Senate Appropriations, and we're taking up an amendment to the Budget Adjustment Act that's being offered by Senator Pearson. The Economic Development Committee reviewed the amendment, took testimony from numerous witnesses, and recommend that the amendment be supported on a vote of 4-1. And so, Senator Pearson, if you would like to just review what your amendment does and why you're offering it, that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Pearson, Senator from Chittenden. And I hope you have the language. It's in the calendar for today, but I also had sent it to Chrissy, the latest version yesterday. Depending on who you ask, this is either not going to change anything or is a terrible idea because it's so impactful. So I'm not sure where we land, but I appreciate your time, and I appreciate that Economic Development took some time, and I watched much of their deliberation, and it was interesting to hear from, say, the Associated General Contractors say that, they deal with this basically all the time. AOT testified that, in fact, compared to Davis-Bacon, the state's prevailing wage was very simple and unburdensome. The concept here is one that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's standard, and that is taking the rules we use in construction, in the capital bill, in state construction, and applying them to construction funded by ARPA, with a trigger of anything that's a construction project that's getting over $200,000 from ARPA. That is a higher trigger than what we do for the capital bill, but I have strived here. Is it strived, Senator Bruce? I've striven. Yes. I've strived to make this as simple as possible for all you and for us and for contractors that are involved. So when we, and this is long settled, when we build projects as the state through the capital bill, we basically say we want to make sure that we pay the folks doing the job decently. And it's a prevailing wage. DOL updates this periodically. And, I think the reality is it will have no impact for your skilled positions, electricians, plumbers, those folks. But the protection is perhaps more important for the entry-level positions, the flaggers on the highway, the people shoveling gravel. And in the current job market, I'm not convinced this will have an immediate effect, but ARPA is going to last for another 4 years. It's going to be doling out. And so I think it is important to just apply the principle we've agreed to on capital projects to the ARPA dollars. We did something similar in ARA under the Douglas administration. I looked at that language. That's what got us started. That was much more complex. We directed the administration to set this up and compare it to Davis-Bacon, and they testified that they had 14 different pay schedules based on the county. We're not doing any of that. Prevailing wage has 3 regions of the state, particularly impactful in the Kingdom and in Southern Vermont, I would mention. So we did it in ARPA, we do it in Capital Bill, and what we're trying to say here is let's be sure we're protecting our folks as we hope to do significant projects using ARPA money that, a few years ago, none of us would have anticipated. Given that windfall, it seems appropriate to me that we would make sure we're protecting folks, giving them a floor, and particularly, perhaps more important, should something shift in the economy. Maybe not a big impact right today with a tight job market, but if something shifts. And I would just say, people will, we have, as a caucus, as a Senate caucus, I should say, and as the legislature more generally, we're interested in combating income inequality at some level. We have that as on our minds. We're very clearly interested in workforce, in strengthening our workforce. New York and Massachusetts have a much higher prevailing wage. They have what's called the union wage. That comes with about an 80% add-on for benefits, much, much stronger than what we're talking about here. But New Hampshire has nothing. And so, maybe that is a way for us to entice people to come work on these projects and make sure we have a workforce that can meet the needs that we're going to be pretty demanding, right? We have a lot of money, big projects going out. I'll just say finally, the last part of this, it very clearly states again, with an eye towards simplicity, if there's federal money involved, mingled in addition to ARPA dollars, mingled with these projects, Davis-Bacon typically applies because of federal money, which is, so we're just trying to make it clear, if Davis-Bacon applies, that sort of supersedes this provision. And finally, you'll see in the middle, in the second section, is a condition of when this applies. What I was trying to do was say that this applies for the projects entertained in the BAA, but also some of your work last year appropriated dollars that haven't actually kicked into a bid project, or it's not underway yet. And so we're trying to apply it to those that haven't started, but also trying very hard not to complicate anything that's out for bid or out for an RFI or any of that. So trying to draw a neat line and just say, projects that haven't started, this will apply. But if you're underway, certainly if you're under contract, we're not trying to go there. So many of us, I was pleased to see many senators join me as co-sponsors. Was pleased to see the discussion in Senate Economic Development be a pretty thorough one, and frankly, I was kind of surprised that at some of the interest that came in and said, this is not a big deal, we deal with this anyway, and would welcome support from your committee, Madam Chair.
Comments from, did talk to Gus Seelig, because housing is certainly a big area, and his response was the same, I guess, as the other testimony. The big concern was around the burden of documentation and compliance. And that was one of the questions I had was, well, would we need to appropriate money for administration, for oversight? And I think the Economic Development Committee's position was that this would be sort of like minimum wage. It's really a self-declaration and a so that it would not be like Davis-Bacon has, I think you have to report payroll every 2 weeks, and it's a very labor intensive, and that's why AOT has got staff that specialize in it, and but that is for contracts for more than 10 million. So the bidders on those projects have got the capacity to meet those requirements. I see Senator Sears has his hand up. You're muted.
Host, because I was talking on the phone. And thank you, Chrissy, for muting me. But it was Commissioner Brown, so I guess it's okay.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I have a question. The 42%, 42.5% benefit, that seems a little cumbersome to me. And maybe that's the norm and everything else, but back in the day, I wonder how, a small construction company that gets a bid is supposed to figure the 42.5%. What benefit would they then have to give, or would that eliminate some small construction companies? For example, let's say that it's a 5-member crew that bid on something, they get it, and then they find out that 3 of their workers are covered by their school teacher's spouse, who they don't have to pay health insurance for them. Well, right away, you get a hard time getting 42.5% if you're not paying health. I'm curious about that part, and if that would have unintended consequences.
So I'd be glad to answer, and it's a good question. I'll answer it as best I can. But I'll just back up and say some will complain that this is rushed and that we haven't done our due diligence and we don't know what the impact is. The prevailing wage law has been around since the 90s, and was updated periodically here and there. And they are not casually updates. Those are not sort of 10 minutes in front of a committee. Those are, I've been involved in some of them in my time. They were taking, in fact, sometimes years, retrying. And so the benefit amount is the compromise from the last time, as I understand it. We updated the prevailing, we, the legislature, updated the prevailing wage law, and it was a compromise. It is not to say you must give benefits that are as generous as of at least 42.5%. It is you could just pay them that. It is a way of trying to standardize, well, we pay $20, but they get health care and they get retirement and they get vacation, and we pay 30, but they don't get any of that. It is a dollar amount that, as I understand, was hashed out over a compromise, and you could have zero benefits and you would have to increase the pay 42.5%. I was just touching base with someone from the building trades who was comparing it to Massachusetts, and they're using a union wage much higher, and they have a trigger of 80% or high 70s% for the benefits, and that's because they have a generous pension, healthcare, and insurance, all that stuff. So it's not my number. It's statute for what we do already with capital bills, capital budgets, capital projects, excuse me. And it's been the subject of hours and weeks and maybe even months of negotiation that has landed that on what we do for capital projects.
Yeah, but some of these ARPA projects are not similar to the capital projects. As I see it, so you're building a house,
yeah,
or you've got ARPA money to do something. You're a small construction company. Are you going to be left out of the ability to bid on this? That's my question.
Well, I guess I don't see why that would be. We're only talking about construction projects, and Senator Sears, help me understand. I mean, there's a published wage schedule, and there's a 42.5% adder accounting for benefits. So if you're paying benefits that equal 30%, you would up the salary 12.5%. If you're not paying any benefits, you would up the salary 42.5%. So it's not clear to me why anybody would therefore be left out. It's in fact very standard for our certainly the main contractors that do work with the state all the time are more than accustomed to this. And many of them, as was testified by AOT, are accustomed to Davis-Bacon, which is far more onerous.
Further questions, Senator Sears, Senator Nitka?
No, I'm good. Well,
So
I'm not good, but I'm.
Chris, with regard to the fringe benefits, I'm not familiar with what all of the fringe benefits are. I understand what you're saying about you could give money instead of the benefits, but say you wanted to give the benefits and how they're valid, how much they're worth. It's hard for me to know, but what are they? All of them?
Let's see if I can try to find it. If you're looking at, here we go. This is right out of the capital, the language, the prevailing wage language. Fringe benefit means benefits including paid vacations and holidays, sick leave, employer contributions, and reimbursements to health insurance and retirement benefits and similar benefits that are incidents of employment. So it's your suite of, think of the benefits of that come with your job that have to do with your standard of living. Again, you might give all of those and hit your 42.5%. You might give none of them and have to increase the cash value. I think that's why the compromise was landed on many years ago in the state prevailing wage structure, was trying to recognize that some people offer benefits, some people don't. We needed a way of standardizing that.
And do generally each of those have a value? In other words, somebody might have health insurance whereby you pay a certain deductible and others maybe you pay the full deductible? Does that all have to be analyzed so you can figure out how much each of those, say, insurance programs that company offers are worth? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, an employer certainly is going to understand the dollar amount that they're paying per each employee and be able to do that arithmetic. And that will, again, we're a little light on enforcement here, but they are, by accepting these grants, they are accepting the condition of needing to apply the prevailing wage law. So they will have to figure out, how they are meeting that obligation. If they have a generous benefits package, they're probably covered. They'll do that arithmetic and know that they're covering it that way. If they don't, again, they'll have to boost the pay.
Can I just ask
one more? Yeah. Mhm.
part of that?
Go ahead.
And do I understand that the cost of materials for any project is included in the 200,000?
Yes, it is.
Well, the trigger is just simply the amount of the grant. So
Mhm.
yes, it would be. Yep.
Yeah.
And again, though, this is effectively double the threshold that we use already in the capital bill. That kicks in when it's a project of $100,000 or more. I'm being fuzzy there because the language is a little clunky, but 100,000 is very clearly a trigger in the capital bill, and this is double that. Trying to, again, make it simple, straightforward, and recognize, there are concerns about the inflation and material costs.
Senator Starr and then Senator Baruth.
Yeah, that was my question, how this deduct was compared to our capital construction bills. And you just said this is double what the capital construction bill requires, 100,000. This is 200,000.
That's
Yeah,
the trigger, not the deduction or anything. It's all, I'm really just trying to move the law we follow to ARPA and have it apply to any construction that's over $200,000 of ARPA grants.
So that originally there was no threshold, and that's would have brought in every ARPA funded project, and that was creating a little heartburn for me, because if we gave a landlord or property owner $25,000 to fix up a vacant apartment so it could be rented, generally the work done on that would be with smaller companies, maybe 2 or 3 employees, and but the threshold excludes all of those smaller. For example, anything we would do under the rental improvement program. So that's why having a threshold of some significant amount helps provide protection to the small businesses in Vermont, but also limits the number of projects size that would fall into this requirement. Does that clarify it, Senator Starr?
Yeah, I don't know who gets the bulk of our ARPA funds, but probably Gus gets about as many dollars as any one single outfit. Did he, when you talked with him, did he say how many projects that he lets out that would be greater than the 200,000?
When I talked to him and he got back to me, and he'd had some discussion with the regional, the local housing entities, and the feedback was that this really, that they were already meeting this standard now. And so this gets back into, well, is this more symbolic than expansive? The one concern he expressed was around the documentation that would be required. And that's why I guess to some extent we're saying this is self-declaration, and the intent is simply that this would be part of the requirement of the grant, but there would not be that biweekly submittal of payroll and the kind of rigorous oversight that comes with the Davis-Bacon. But those are large projects; those are 10 million or more. So the concern is around the smaller businesses and where within that market and with those ARPA appropriations where they would fit relative to the larger entities. So the feedback, because housing is such a big piece of the funding, that's why I wanted to ask what from Gus, and he talked about it with other housing folk, and that's what he that's the feedback that he gave me, that it was not a problem. It was something they were doing routinely and did not see it as a deterrent. He did talk about, you know, the need for a threshold, because a lot of, as we say, a couple of guys in a pickup truck are doing an awful lot of work in this state, and we don't want to, and where workforce and getting people to do work is such a short supply, not have a threshold that would be so low that you're having a very substantial negative impact on that group of contractors.
Yeah.
Senator Baruth, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the committee, as I said yesterday, I'm a co-sponsor of this amendment, and my reasons we've just gone over really. It's in line with the way we normally handle things, except it's been made more palatable for ARPA funds because we've doubled that threshold. There's also the fact that it's prospective and it's not going to affect anything that's already under contract. And the other piece of it is economic development. We threw it to them to do the heavy lifting on testimony, and there was nothing alarming at all that came out of their testimony. It was more or less, this is the way we already think about and handle these situations. So hard for me to see how there would be any real opposition on the floor, except from people who oppose these sorts of regulations generally. So I favor it very strongly.
Okay, Senator Pearson, we're going to have to move along. I realize, and I don't know, Chrissy, I think we're overbooked for this afternoon, if you want to know the truth.
Right now I have Dale on standby when you wrap up amendments. But I could move, and then they have the Department of Health coming from 2:30 to 3:30.
Okay, well, we'll see how we
for now and see how far we get, and then we can go from there.
Why don't we do that? Because we still have Senator Brock here with his amendment.
Yeah.
Senator Pearson, you had another comment?
Well, just thank you for your time and consideration. And I would just say, you know, quickly, I'm trying to make this a standard and apply what we do all the time to this. And, you know, Madam Chair, you said, I'm not sure if it's symbolic. I don't think it is symbolic, but I'm not sure how much impact it has. But I do see this as a protection against a backslide if the job market shifts. And, you know, if we don't have something like that, I remind this committee that when we pay, when workers are not well paid, it costs us, whether it's in the earned income tax credit or the health, you know, subsidies, or on and on and on. You know them better than I do. And so when we are the customer in this sense, I think it is important. And this has been our expression of values as an employer in that sense. And I hope we can apply it to this bucket, a significant bucket of funds. Thank you.
Okay. And as you point out, this isn't the first time. Aaa money was another example where it was all the federal dollars. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to continue before the committee takes action. We've got Senator Brock here to present his amendment as well, and then we can decide how we want to proceed with the two amendments that we have. Thank you very much, Chris. Senator Brock, you have an amendment that you would like to bring to the committee?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an amendment on the Budget Adjustment Act. It's something that I believe I referred to in testimony before the Senate yesterday when we considered the act. And there were a number of pieces and issues that I brought up during my testimony, but I really wanted to summarize it into an overall issue. And what I'm hoping is that it's an issue that this committee and the full Senate can agree on, so that we can get the minority, which disagreed with the Budget Adjustment Act, into agreement. And the first to me and most important piece is as much a philosophical piece and a affirmation, which is the first item in the agenda or in the amendment before you, a reaffirmation that we want to focus this ARPA money on truly transformational things, that we don't want to use it for things that can be done via other funding sources, and to reaffirm that commitment to using these things in a transformational manner for broadband, water, sewer, housing, economic recovery, and climate mitigation in our rural communities suffering from demographic declines, rather than spending them on programs and services that can be supported through other funds. This reinforces what the governor included in his budget method, that we have this once in a lifetime opportunity, and it really needs to be focused on those things that are truly transformational. The second thing in the amendment that it does is it looks at the issue regarding the obligation of funds for the State House renovation. And I think we included here a $1.5 million as a planning grant or for planning funds in order to do the State House renovation. And it adds simply a rider that says that these monies, if not used for that purpose, will revert to ARPA, to our ARPA pool rather than being used for any other purpose. That's all this amendment does.
Senator Baruth.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Brock. I appreciate the look at this. I'm focusing for the moment on line 14 and then line 17. So you say it's important to reaffirm our commitment using ARPA funds in a transformational manner, including, I usually understand including to be including but not limited to. In other words, you enumerate a couple of categories there, but the word including seems to suggest that there might be others.
Yes, Senator. The original draft that I had of this did not include the word including, but since I did this in such a hurry, I put that in there because I'm sure I must have forgotten something.
Okay.
But the intent, quite frankly, is to limit it to the kinds of things here, because those are the things that are really on the agenda. And that was my intent.
Okay, and then I appreciate that. Let me just look at line 17 then. You say, rather than spending them on programs and services that can be supported with other funds. Now, I think anything can be supported with other funds. It just means that we have to make different choices in how we put the budget together. So it's hard for me to understand what you're really saying, other than if I look at it as limiting the list, it's as though you're saying the only things that could be supported with other funds are the things the governor says could be supported with other funds.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Oh, okay, but in conjunction with the beginning part where you're reaffirming the governor's list of what can be transformational, it seems to me like this sentence is, its intent is to place the legislature and the appropriations committees under the behest of the governor. That's the only way I can read it. And I'll let you speak to that.
Okay, Senator Brock, one of the things that I'm trying to also look at is those two sections as well, because in fact, just about everything we're using ARPA for could be funded by other funds if we had them. Broadband, sewer, water, housing, etc. So this is where we get into that whole morass of definition and what constitutes transformational, and the governor is basically has his definition, which is up until last year was very much along the traditional infrastructure line. But in looking at the bill, what we have here for language actually is revisiting in the budget adjustment the language that was included in the big bill of last year, which talks about to be spent over 4 years, and that we have an unprecedented opportunity to invest But one of the things not listed, but we have here in the budget itself, is a 250 million for health, well-being, and recovery of Vermonters, for workforce development and for business supports. And so this is where you get into really the gray area of so much of what might be a topic of, well, should we use general fund, would be around that workforce stabilization and addressing the healthcare needs of Vermonters, since that's being really directed to those areas where we're really struggling to provide the necessary healthcare services. So I'm just thinking that if we had that language that said you can't use it for things that ARPA, for things that could be funded with other funds, we wouldn't be able to use ARPA for just about anything. And I don't think that was the intent, obviously.
And certainly that's not my intent. And that's why I included the word including in here, and to make clear that there may be some other issues. But I think that most people sitting around a table, reviewing what spending is, can decide what is and is not transformational, what is or is not a major infrastructure issue, among other things, that would last for, in effect, a lifetime. We have this once in a lifetime opportunity to use our money strategically for the things that really matter, that can make a major and substantial difference over time. And yes, we may differ philosophically about what those things are, but the issue of looking at them on a case-by-case basis and making our decision with our lens on that word transformation, I think is critical. And I have added this here because I wonder if that's what we are doing in some of the issues, some of the areas in which we're spending. And the idea of this particular amendment, which gives us a lot more comfort, is it puts our eyes back on that transformational ball. And I think that's really important.
I understand, your focus on that. I'm just looking at, in a Budget Adjustment Act, creating a sort of that philosophical framework in a budget adjustment that doesn't exist in the underlying bill itself, where we do have a statement about ARPA, and we recognize an unprecedented opportunity to invest in recovery and long-term future in Vermont by supporting Vermonters' health, well-being, strengthening communities, building businesses, environment, and climate. And we anticipate making these following commitments. And included in that was the 250 million for the health, well-being, et cetera. So what I'm trying to crosswalk is what we have and what we passed and what the governor signed already, with this now emerging definition that ARPA has to meet that transformational requirement, and do it in the Budget Adjustment Act. That's really what I'm struggling with, and how and that, and the implications it has for the underlying bill itself, and the language that we passed there. Senator Sears, perhaps you can.
I have a number of questions, but the first is, am I looking at the right amendment? Because I'm looking at the amendment that was offered by, or that Chrissy sent us at 1:16 p.m. And evidently people are looking at another one, because I don't have any lines on mine. And Senator Baruch said something about lines.
Senator Sears, is I got an amendment this morning, which is the correct amendment that I have. And it was in Word form. And I don't know if you're aware that the state is having a problem with Word today, in that it is not translating Word documents in a quick manner. And that's what created the problem. I tried to send at the very last minute a corrected Word version as opposed to the PDF that I got, because the PDF that I got from Ledge Counsel was the incorrect version. So it may be that you may not have the correct version, but I hope you did. The net effect, though, is two things in the amendment that you should have in front of you. The first is the reaffirmation, section 52,
Yeah,
And the
no, that
second-
I think I have the right one,
Right.
but it's got no lines, and that's what confused me when Senator Baruch was talking about line 14.
Yeah, yeah.
Mine doesn't have any lines on it.
Yeah,
That's
and the second piece is solely the State House expansion
Yep.
in focusing it. Those are the two
Okay,
pieces
well,
of the amendment.
my concern is with the First Amendment. Actually, I like the Second Amendment, as one might guess. But
Well, actually, Senator Sears would like your amendment to go further and that we could solve our
well,
state house capacity by having a smaller, by
well,
having a
I
smaller
felt
legislature.
that we wouldn't need the new building if we cut the house.
I had another
75
solution,
members.
Senator, that I thought would be more applicable, and that is to use the space that we would create in the State House to house the state employees that would be hired through the rental registry and the contractor registry.
Well, anyway, here's my problem with trying to do this. Just before I got on to this meeting, I was dealing with a problem with difficult to place kids around the state who are in dire straits and staying in hospitals for day on day. We've got immediate problems, and we need to use some of this money to try to dig our way out of some of the problems that we currently have. And pensions is not the least of them, by the way. I mean, that's one of the huge ones. So I'm kind of worried about, saying that these funds have to be used for X purpose. That's why I like the language that Senator Kitchell just read regarding,
Well,
Well,
I'm just
my
quoting, I want to
issue.
be clear, what I'm quoting is the language in the FY22 budget bill that we
No, I know.
passed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, so it's not, it's not attributed to me. I'm just trying to take what was
Well,
being proposed
I
here.
I always give you credit for anything that's
Oh.
in the Budget Adjustment Act, Senator.
Oh,
I
all
thought
right.
you wrote the whole thing and that Stephanie Barrett did off.
Yeah, right. Don't
May I
you
respond?
just enjoy appropriations, Senator Brock? Oh,
Well, it's almost as much fun as
Anyhow.
fun.
yeah.
That's all I wanted to make sure I've got the right
Yeah.
amendment, and that I thank you for the Second Amendment. I don't think I can vote for the first one, but
Well, let me just add that the reason for the First Amendment, more than anything else, is to simply set a philosophical tone. It's not necessarily to be a binding measure on the one hand, but in terms of the need to use money for something else, there will always be the need to use money for something else. It will constantly arise, but the question is where the focus ought to be. And when you have this money available to do something that we would never do before, to use it on things that are ongoing, that can be spent, that can be funded elsewhere, I think is a dangerous road to continually go down. And whether you set limits, whether you set targets, and in many ways, what I'm just suggesting more than anything else is that we set targets and we set a philosophy as to how we approach this, and nothing more that is binding.
Senator Baruch, you had a comment?
On the Second Amendment, I'm just wondering, I am imagining it wasn't presented to institutions, but it's hard for me to see how we could vote on this without at least consulting the chair of institutions.
I did consult the chair of institutions on this, and my understanding is he's favorable to it.
Okay, well, that would make a difference to me. So thank you.
Oh, you mean in terms of having if the money's not spent by October?
Yes.
That provision?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I think where we're really struggling is your language being proposed here within the context of an adjustment to a bill we've already passed and the language that is there. One of the struggles we have is historically, as you would know from your prior work in state government, general fund has always been used. We've always leveraged federal dollars, and general fund gives us the greatest flexibility. That's why, for example, on housing, some of the ARPA money was not used because general fund gives greater flexibility in the drawdown of the tax credits. And so this view around how ARPA should be used sometimes comes into the practicality of how the advantage of our general fund. And so the fundamental issue is what funding source we're using to underwrite these appropriations. And so that's sort of where historically we've always wanted to have the flexibility and use general fund last. And so that's part of sort of a different way of approaching budgeting in terms of what fences we put around or the definitions around how we should be using ARPA. So that's part of what you're encountering here in our discussion as well. Other comments from, now the 50 million, I don't have a copy of your newest one, Senator Brock.
50 million, I dropped the 50 million out.
Okay.
And I dropped it out because, after further discussion, after you and I talked today, it's clear that the 50 million doesn't really do anything, whether it's reserved or unreserved. It's really going to be dealt with as an appropriation, and that's probably the proper time to deal with it. So I just dropped that entirely.
Okay, and you put in the section 68, making it very clear.
Okay. Section 68 to deal with the issue that we discussed.
Okay, I think there was certainly people around the State House expansion. This is something that obviously there's some concern about this expenditure and the need and so forth. You can sense that. And I think if we want to put that in, and that's and we have the agreement of the institution's chair, that the question is sort of the language and how to write it or how to align it with what we already have. And I know that's important to you and important to your caucus. So we can have more discussion as a committee about that first instance of your amendment.
And I would also suggest it is possible, Madam Chair, that the language that you had in the original bill that you made reference to deals with this issue of focusing on transformational change. And it may be something that would fit to, in effect, reincorporate or reaffirm the language that is already there without adding new language, and it may accomplish the same purpose. The purpose that I simply focus the attention of people who are spending money on this as a need to discuss, nothing more.
All right, I appreciate it. And so it's, I think what you're saying is how can we, in a way that doesn't create a whole lot of disjuncture with what we've already passed and the governor's already signed in affirming. And because we talk about certainly in certain appropriations to enable foundational investments. So there are different words that are being used, I think. So maybe we can think about something that would be acceptable along that line, but doesn't create disjuncture with what we already have.
I'm happy to consider that in redrafting the amendment in a way that might satisfy both of our aims.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Bruce.
Before we lose Senator Brock, I just wanted to ask, and this goes back to what the chair was saying about a disconnect with the underlying bill. So theoretically, if we were to add some version of your first amendment that we could live with, and we added your second amendment, but we did not change the spending pattern in the bill itself. In other words, we still committed ARPA funds to things that the governor or maybe your conference doesn't agree with. You mentioned one of your aims was to try to unify the vote on this. Would In other words, if you got your language, but we didn't change the ARPA spending pattern, would your folks vote for this bill?
My sense is they would, because what this is a message designed for the future. It's not designed to rewrite the Budget Adjustment Act.
Thank you.
All right. And in fact, your amendment didn't in any way revisit the appropriations, except for the State House expansion planning. Senator Starr.
Yeah, Senator Brock, I'm sure the chairs mentioned it, but you and your caucus, you are familiar with swapping out ARCA funds where they couldn't do matching funds and putting in general funds, and then taking those same ARCA funds but using them elsewhere. That what it has, it's enhanced our overall ability to spend money, more money, but it was federal money and saving our money. And it's really, I don't know how many million that we new and more federal dollars we've been able to generate by using sometimes ARPA dollars in places where we could use it for a general fund and free that general fund up to use where we could do sharing with other federal monies. So, it's really been quite profitable for the state to have, that ability to do that.
Appreciate your coming in.
Go on.
So I think we'll have more discussion. Maybe there's, we can work on some language that expresses. I think in the end, it's inevitable. People are going to have different opinions around, does that expenditure fit in that definition? And, we're like saying, it seems to fit very much within the intent of the big bill relative to addressing the healthcare needs and the recovery of the state. And that is what's in place now. And so how we revisit it, or whether this is something that we, I guess also when we're building the 23 budget, what that looks like, and whether there's a more expansive or a reaffirmation statement there as well. So you've precipitated a lot of thinking, Senator Brock. And thank you for coming in, and we'll
Thank you for having me today.
And I apologize, I didn't have much time, but I really thank you for making the changes based on our quick conversation that we had before we all went to our noon meetings. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch. Okay, thank you. Chrissy?
Yes, I am here.
All right, it's nearly 2:00. So how far behind are we?
Dale is on standby, and I said if you hadn't wrapped up BAA by 2, we would reschedule them. So if you want to take more time on BAA discussion amendments, we have Department of Health at 2:30, or Dale could come in now and get started, and we could have Department of Health come in at 2:45 and wrap up at 3:30. It's really your call and how much time you want on amendments.
All right, what I would like to do, I think we obviously have to take a position on the prevailing wage amendment. And but the problem is, if we're trying to think about how we could, the language that is so important and how that could be stated, but not be in such a way that it causes, that it somehow is inconsistent with what we have already in the underlying bill. If there's a way of doing that, obviously we're accepting the part about I believe we're getting concurrence on the part about the State House expansion. And so the question is how that statement of purpose around ARPA funding, maybe there's some way of doing that. So that'll take a little bit more time, and maybe it's something that we're going to have to work on offline and then come back and look at it on Tuesday and have some conversations in the interim as to how we might do that. let me ask, Senator Pearson's amendment, I think we should need to take a position on that in terms of, do we view it as a friendly amendment? And I think, Senator Westman, you're not sure. Senator Starr, you would view it as a friendly amendment?
I think, with that cap on it, and we're already doing a similar thing with.
Well,
with
we
our-
could take, the other option, if people are uncomfortable, is simply we don't take a position on it. It's a policy recommendation from the other committee, and that we just remain neutral. That's the other option.
That's
Madam-
what, or we can, I would do either way, but.
Okay. Senator Baruth and then Senator Westman.
I would hope we would take a position in favor. If the votes aren't there to do that, then I would be happier with not taking a position. But the way I view this is, these are the blue collar people who work in construction who benefit from this. So, I feel very good about supporting it with the cap that's on it. It's going to do nothing but strengthen workers and their families. So,
Okay.
that's just where I am on it.
And Bobby, you
Yeah.
feel the same?
Yeah, I mean, we can help the little guy lift them up a little bit. They
Yeah.
don't get too many lifts.
Obviously the impact on small businesses that having no threshold as originally written would have been very significant, but having the 200 addresses that issue. Senator Westman?
I would just say, to be clear about this, I'm not opposed to this, and I totally want to help the little guy. I think the small contractors that are out there that are doing work that might be eligible for these grants, it's difficult to go through all the paperwork and all of that stuff. I think the 200 is too low. I would rather the 200 be higher. You can't build a house now, a single family house, for less than 200. So we're really talking about just an individual house in that piece. I don't know when the 100,000 for the capital bill was put in, but I suspect it was a while ago,
2015.
2015, and there has been a huge run up in cost. But the basic premise of what Senator Pearson puts forward, I can support. I just wish that 200 was more like a $500,000.
I did ask that and raise that question about the cost of materials and the significant increase, and suggested even from 200 to 250, but the committee considered that and still wanted to use the 200,000. So I just want the committee to know I did put that out as a consideration in light of the substantial increase in the cost of materials.
So
Alice?
I'm feeling that the 200,000 is much too low. There's a lot of building going on around here near me, and a lot of small contractors are doing it. And I think that, it would be very burdensome. The cost of materials being in there.
I think we need to look at what the ARPA funding is being used for. And most of the housing is being done through VHCB and their partners. And that they're saying that's not a problem for them. The smaller projects that are funded through ARPA would be more like, repairs like historic buildings might be doing, or the apartment improvement. So the housing in the other area would be probably in broadband, but I imagine those companies that are doing the cables and all that, those are very, very much workers in demand. So I know Chrissy's, so I was just trying to get one thing off the table before 2 o'clock, but I only got 1 minute more to do it.
Should I keep Dale on the calendar and have him come in at 2?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we've got 1 more minute on this, or we're going to have to postpone it until after we finish testimony today, in terms of this amendment.
Madam Chair, Becca is not here, and it seems like we could easily deadlock without a.
Yeah, and I know that she supports this. She was voted in favor of it, and economic development.
Yeah.
So
Nobody asked me,
Yeah.
so I'll tell you.
what?
If Starr and Baruch supported, I'd have a hard time not. But there are 14 co-sponsors, so it's going to pass. I mean, we can get on the floor if there's a roll call and do what we want, but I don't know that we need to waste much more time on it.
Okay.
I think,
Right.
there's general
Make a
support,
vote on it.
and I think we should go forward with it and just say the committee supports it. I'll be the 4th vote, assuming
right.
you support it. I mean,
Yes.
Becca supports it, and so Starr and Baruch, and I'll be the 4th vote, so.
All right. So
Well,
I will, okay. Uh, Senator Westman.
I didn't say I'm not going to be opposed to this. I'm just saying I think the limit is too low.
Well, the House does not have it, so I'm sure we can have more discussion about what that limit might be.
Yep.
All right.
Disturbs me-
Alice,
Disturbs me that it doesn't say in here that materials are included. Does somebody see that in there, that the materials are included in the?
we've already checked it with Becky Wasserman, and that's the capital bill definition, and that's what's being carried over. So the answer is yes, materials are included. I did confirm that.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm opposed to it.
You're opposed? Okay.
But
All
who
right,
cares?
so we'll just say the committee vote was to support it. Thank you. We've got one thing taken care of.
Give-
So one amendment.
we
One
give it-
amendment.
One amendment. All right. So now we are moving on to budget adjustment, 23 budget for Dale. And we have the commissioner and we have Bill Kelly. I don't know, are there other people from the department who are also with you, Commissioner? Or is it?
Deputy Commissioner Megan Tierney Ward will be joining also.
And I see Rich Donahue also on. Okay. All right. So we're trying to do amendments on the budget adjustment in between. So we are getting started a little later. Appreciate your coming today and want to hear the proposed budget for Dale for fiscal 23. I don't know if you're doing the presentation, Commissioner, or however you want to organize it. I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And so how much time do we have would be a question now that we've started a bit late.
Senator Kitchell, it's Chrissy, and we have Department of Mental Health at 2:45, unless you want me to do some shuffling. If you think you need more than 45 minutes.
I don't, oh, how much did we have before? An hour?
Yes.
Why don't we may want to move the other a little later and give a full hour.
Full hour. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Mhm. Okay. I've got to go to the door, Alice, so you've got to take over, please.
Yes, certainly. Why don't you go ahead and start, Monica? And who do you have with you?
Great. So I have our financial director, Bill Kelly, and Deputy Commissioner Megan Tierney Ward will be joining soon. And also the AHS Chief Financial Officer, Rich Donahue, is here.
Very good. So why don't you go ahead and start and do, and why don't you screen share also, or Chrissy could do that.
Okay, so yes, if Christy can share, but I think, so thank you very much. And for the record, my name is Monica White, Commissioner of the Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living. And I think before getting into the dollars, would it be helpful to do a high level overview of our departments and divisions and programs to reorient the committee at a high level to the work that we do before we dive into the dollars? Would that be helpful?
What's the committee's preference?
Well, as long as it's high, we've all been here for a few years, so we don't need a low level one, just a very high one.
I'd say give a 2 minute and move on. This is a pretty seasoned committee.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Fair enough. So I think I'll just, because I always like to frame Dale's mission at the beginning of really any testimony, because that really is the heart of what we do. And our mission is to make Vermont the best state in which to grow old or to live with a disability with dignity, respect, and independence. And really, we have roughly 300 employees across 5 divisions in our commissioner's office, working with a myriad of valued community partners in support of that mission, to make sure that Vermonters with disabilities and older Vermonters are able to receive the services and supports they need, and to be fully included in the hearts of Vermont's communities. So, you know, that's the really 10,000-foot view of what we do. And so our budget testimony document has an incredible amount of detail on all of our divisions, 5 divisions, including the Adult Services Division, Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, Division of Licensing and Protection, and Developmental Disabilities Services Division, as well as our Commissioner's Office. So the document itself, again, has a considerable amount of information about all of our programs. And in the interest of time and your respective familiarity with the work that we do, I won't go into that specifically, and just instead look to dive into the numbers that we have in our governor's recommended budget request. So at a very high level on that front, before walking through each appropriation specifically, our budget includes an 8.5% increase to general fund. It funds caseload pressures across developmental services, choices for care, and brain injury programs. Includes a 3% rate increase for home and community-based services across choices for care to include adult day, home health agencies, area agencies on aging, enhanced residential care, developmental services, and brain injury. It funds the nursing home statutory rate increase. And we have one new policy initiative, which would be to increase staffing to allow for additional capacity for enhanced oversight of long-term care facilities. So very high level. Chrissy, if you are able to share our budget document itself, starting on page 44 of that, would be great. And that's where we want to start walking through specific proposed changes to our budget.
Okay, give me one moment, page 44.
44, please.
Okay.
Yep, there we are. Okay. What did I do? Managed to blow up my screen. Hold on one moment, please. Okay. So on this page 44, our total proposed budget is 585 million, a little over that. And this page represents the balance of that by division. And subsequent sections are by appropriation. The part in our budget document is in alphabetical order by appropriation. So if you're following along in the Excel ups and downs, the order is not going to align, but the content is the same. So the gross increase that we would be Oh, I'm sorry, if you can go to the next page, please. So the gross change from 22 as passed to the 23 recommended budget is $16.8 million. And that is gross across all funds. And then moving to our admin and support section appropriation, that includes a $3 million increase for salary and fringe for Dale employees across all divisions. So all Dale employee salary and fringe are included in our admin budget, and it includes internal service funds, fee for space, and that sort of thing in that figure there. And then the next three.
How many employees, Commissioner, are in your department now?
So the total current proposed is 302 positions, which would be 305 employees because we have several shared positions. And let's see, then moving to, so the next three lines are areas in which we're requesting additional positions, which is included in that figure that I just shared. And so the first would be 6 additional positions for long-term care facility oversight. And that would be 5 positions within our survey and certification unit in our Division of Licensing and Protection, and then 1 position in our Adult Services Division. So the background behind this request is that Vermont currently has approximately 160 state licensed long-term care facilities, and that includes residential care homes, assisted living residences, and therapeutic community residences, who collectively care for many of the most vulnerable Vermonters. Currently, our staffing structure in survey and certification is such that we only have the capacity to survey state licensed facilities every 2 years. The nature and volume of those facilities' work has grown in complexity over the past decade or so, requiring additional support and oversight to maintain safe care and good quality of life for Vermonters residing in those facilities. So we're requesting 6 additional positions, which will allow us to increase oversight annually, to be annually in those facilities, and also importantly, to provide proactive, targeted, additional quality support for oversight of enhanced residential care services within those facilities. The next item is a request for 2 additional investigator positions within Adult Protective Services, which is also based in our Division of Licensing and Protection. And so a little bit of background on this is that we've had increasing numbers of Adult Protective Services cases over the past decade or so, and the number of APS investigators that we've had has remained steady. Looking to increase the number of positions that we have to ensure that we're able to continue to dedicate the appropriate amount of hours for each investigation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of vulnerable adults, and requesting 2 positions for that. And then the third line is we're requesting 2 additional positions within our Office of Public Guardian, which is based in our Developmental Disability Services Division. Currently, our Office of Public Guardian serves well over 700 individuals, and caseload counts have right now currently are approximately 30 clients per guardian, and best practice standards for this line of work nationally would indicate that public guardians should have caseloads of no more than 20 per guardian. And additionally, we've had, so since 2006, the number of people appointed by the courts into guardianship has increased by 8%. And the number of people we are serving through our representative payee services within OPG has increased by 23%. Yet the staff that we have in this office have declined by 11% during that period. So to start to address this increasing caseload gap, we're requesting 2 positions this coming fiscal year. And so that is the admin appropriation. Moving on to the Dale grants appropriation. Adult Services Division grants. This reflects all Adult Services Division programs with the exception of Choices for Care and Brain Injury, which have their own appropriations. This appropriation has 2 modest increases. One of them, the first being about $75,000. And this represents annualization of the previously agreed upon collective bargaining agreement with ASME. And the second line item is a $57,000, which represents the 3% rate increase for home and community-based services providers within this appropriation. Moving to the blind and visually impaired.
Monica, I have a question. And the Adult Services Division grants, you said that doesn't include the Choices for Care. So is this the IDDS? I'm 19 million, and you're talking about the AFSCME, which is personal care. What population is being served here?
So this is all of our programs with the exception of CFC and brain injury. So independent direct support workers for attendant services. Megan, could I ask you to jump in and quickly rattle off who else is included in here?
Yes, this is Megan Tierney Ward, the Deputy Commissioner at Dale. And you're actually spot on, Commissioner. That's the Attendant Services program primarily. So that's a program that's 100% managed through ARIS as a self-directed service. And so that applies to the 3% as well as the correct collective bargaining.
What is the population, though, being served by these providers?
Yeah,
If it's not Choices for Care and it's not IDDS, I'm just struggling to understand who's getting the service here.
Yes, Madam Chair. Those are the folks who are eligible under the Medicaid Attendant Services Program for self-directed services. It's a state plan benefit that's in regulation. Mm-hmm. And I see Bill Kelly's here as well. And maybe Bill, if I'm missing something, you could jump in as well.
Yeah, Bill Kelly, Department of Aging and Independent Living Financial Director. I think the question is more broad and not just related to the ups and downs that we're presenting, but more what are we buying for the 19 million? And mm-hmm. the Attendant Services General Fund and Medicaid program are in there. The Aaa funding. It's all the Adult Services Division grants, with the exception of TBI and Choices for Care. There's self-neglect grants in that appropriation. The adult day health rehab services, that's in that appropriation. Okay. The bulk of it is the AAA federal funding.
All right. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Bill and Megan.
And I had a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Starr.
I see you in that same area. You're going to raise someone's pay from $12.05 to $12.80. You must have a real problem with help in that price range, I would think, because I don't know of anybody that pays that little amount of money per hour to a worker.
Right. So that's a great question and a great point, Senator Starr. So just to clarify this one a bit further, so this would be the minimum of the minimum wage. Employers who hire services through this collective bargaining agreement in many cases choose to pay their employees a higher rate than that. And this is actually, so this is the annualization of the previous agreement, and we are currently in negotiations or collective bargaining for a subsequent update to this minimum wage threshold. So it doesn't mean that providers are independent direct support workers are all reimbursed at this 1205 or 1280 figure, but that's the minimum that the collective bargaining agreement authorizes. I don't know, Megan, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that to help frame that issue?
Monica, no, you've again answered it spot on. This is the minimum requirement, and it was what was negotiated in the last collective bargaining agreement.
I think Senator Starr's concern is, can you find people, even if it's greater than the minimum here? Are you having trouble hiring people to provide these services, even if it's at a bit higher wage?
Yeah, so that Senator Kitchell is an excellent question. And I think, yes, we are seeing the effects of the workforce shortage across programs to include independent direct support workers and caregivers. Folks are having a difficult time and increasingly looking to supports from family caregivers. So yes, that is a pressure.
Okay.
Well, these are the same people we have to pay their child care services for. We have to pay their, do health insurance for. And, it'd just be better if they were paid a fair wage and showed up for work every day. But anyways, thank you for the answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're down to blind and visually impaired. Unless there are further questions on the adult services. Commissioner, we have a request here from the executive director of the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired about continued funding for the SMART program for training, so that people with visual impairment are trained and can use the technology to help them communicate and to also benefit from the technology that's available to them, but they need training. Does your budget include anything for the continuation of that training?
This budget does not include funding for that.
Okay. Well, just to let you know, we have a request for $100,000 to continue the training. Was that request made and not accepted?
I do not recall having received a request for that prior to the budget development. I do not recall having heard that.
Right. Well, now you know we have the request for permanent funding. Is that, I guess that raises a question, is this ongoing? It seems like this is the population. I'm not sure of the number of Vermonters who, I suppose, as we age, visual impairments also become more prevalent as well. So this would be a request for ongoing funding at that level.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, that's Senator Westman, that's your section of the budget.
Hear you in we'll be circling back around.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to ask if it had been submitted and rejected, or whether it was coming to us for the first time.
Okay. All right. So if we move to the brain injury program, which I believe in statute is still the traumatic brain injury program, we have just a couple of relatively modest changes here. One of them being a projected utilization increase for this represents for 2 new individuals coming in. And then here we have the calculation for the 3% home and community-based services rate increase of 165.
That's a relatively small caseload. So what is the caseload right now with the addition that we are reflecting in the budget adjustment?
Let's see, I don't have that figure right in front of me, but we can pull that and get that to you. If it might be actually in the testimony document itself, but we'll make sure that you have it one way or another.
I could give an approximate number. It's 70-ish, somewhere in there.
All right, thank you, Bill. That's good enough.
Okay. Great, thank you. Then if we move to our, sorry, I was hearing some feedback. Moving to the next page, if you would, Chrissy. Thank you. So the top is our choices for care appropriation. And here, the first line item is a statutory nursing home inflationary increase. And actually, let me take a step back. This, the $2.8 million figure that you see here is actually inclusive of two components. One of those is the nursing home statutory rate increase, which is $4.2 million increase. And then the second item is a bed day utilization projected decrease of 1.3 million. And the two of those together reflect this line of $2.8 million of an increase between those two items together.
Are you saying then in this fiscal year, you're going to do a rebasing on the rates?
So Bill, can you speak to the technical aspect of the statutory inflation?
Because the reason I'm asking is we put language in the BAA relative to rates for nursing homes, and they've been, my goodness, that's my cat. The costs for contract nurses have been really, significant. And we worked out language that was acceptable to Secretary Samuelson and the nursing home representative. And I was just wondering how this figure connects to the language that we've just put into the BAA within the last several days.
Okay, so that's a great question. This figure, the $4.2 million increase that's embedded in this line is not inclusive of that language that was just recently calculated. What I don't know is whether that the BAA language that you're referring to would impact this figure. Bill, would you know that?
So we do the nursing rebase is done every other year, and this year is the year that it's not done. So this is just the inflationary increase and the decrease in the Medicaid bed days. And so the language that you're referring to wouldn't affect this line item.
We know that utilization has been artificially suppressed because nursing homes have not been able to accept patients who need the care, and they've been backing up in the hospitals. The agency put in some additional money to fund contract nurses so that these facilities could take, I think the original tranche of patients was about 80. And I'm just wondering to what extent that downward utilization is, attributable to these time-limited circumstances, and that that it's been depressed artificially because of the staffing problems, and that the utilization level is going, if we ever can get the staffing taken care of, it's going to increase again.
Bill, I see you.
So
you know what I'm asking, don't you, Bill?
yes. What's interesting is the first year of the pandemic, the utilization actually increased, and we're seeing a slight decrease from last year, under the pandemic. So I just want to give you a picture of the last couple of years. But the slight marginal decrease of only 1%, that's consistent with, going back even to 1995, when utilization has been decreasing. And to be honest with you, the decrease in most years is way above just the 1%. So I think we're accommodating any artificial decrease due to COVID.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see, because obviously we're taking this relative to other discussions around what's happening in hospitals, and I don't know the extent to which, I guess that's yet to be determined, the extent to which that's influenced the utilization, but in a time-limited way, as opposed to structural changes of more people being cared for in the community.
Did you get us a breakdown of the 230 million? Where it's spent? Because I see what the increases are. The $10,558,955 is an increase. But I don't know where the base appropriation goes. How much of it goes to nursing homes? How much of it goes to, homemade care, etc. And in order to determine, how well Choices for Care is doing, I think it'd be interesting to know how many people are using alternatives at this time. And also, I'm particularly concerned about the 3% rate increase to providers, and whether that's enough for them to be able to hire people to work in whatever it might be, whoever the provider is. So I would personally like, doesn't have to be today, but I'd like the breakdown of the 230 million.
I could quickly give you that. So we have basically three categories: moderate needs, home and community-based services, and nursing home. And the figures I'm going to give you are state fiscal year 22 breakdown of those three components, just to give you a sense. The nursing, the amount of funding budgeted for nursing home is approximately 2/3 of the Choice for Care appropriation. So in state fiscal year 22, it's 138.6 million. Moderate needs is 6.3 million. And then the home and community-based services is almost 94 million. And I was looking at because Money Follows the Person is buried in Choices for Care, and it got reauthorized. And part of the Money Follows the Person program is we have to keep a maintenance of effort level of general fund when that program started, which used 2010 general fund for home and community-based services. And I can tell you, from 2010 through current, the general fund appropriated increase for home and community-based services and Choices for Care is over $16 million general fund. So, I think the intent of giving consumers choice and being, and the goal of serving more in home and community-based services has certainly happened.
Okay, but I'd still like to see it in figures.
Probably is there in your budget material, but maybe we can sort it out so we can see it. Because obviously we do get the report that shows, the expenditure and number of participants in Choices for Care versus nursing homes, et cetera. So maybe that report, just bringing the latest one, would be helpful. Because that does give you a sense of the split between the two. pieces of.
Who are the, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think that might be a good report for you, Senator Sears, to
Yeah,
see.
that's really what I'm looking for.
Yeah, okay.
Who are the providers getting the 3% in this case? Number 4, the 2.6 million.
So there'd be adult day, AAA, ERC, basically all the components of home and community-based services and choice for care.
Home health.
Correct, home health. And I'm not sure the report that you were referring to, Senator Kitchell, but we have the longitudinal data going back for at least 2 years that we can send to you that gives a good breakdown of the choice of care program.
I'd also like to know how the providers are going to survive with 3% at a time when they can't hire people. There's an incredible shortage of people willing to work, and we're giving them a 3% increase, and I don't know how they're going to survive. I really don't. There's such a shortage of workers. I deal with that on a daily basis, and it's not good. We're not under Medicaid or in my case, but finding people to work at low wages is very difficult, and 3% won't cut it. I think we're not being realistic. Our budget, doesn't reflect, let's say this to make, I'm not blaming this department or any single department, but I'm hearing our budget and it doesn't reflect the problems that people are facing in the middle of this pandemic and post-pandemic in terms of getting people to work. And the governor, made a great speech about transformative, but when I look at your budget, it's not transformative. 3% ain't going to cut it. You're going to have the same problem of finding people to work with the people that need the help.
It's going to be a challenge. I think, from the provider network, and we hear it all the time, and we've heard it historically. I think state employees have negotiated when you're looking at their salaries and that we're funding here in the admin side. And then the providers that are in the community that are providing serving these populations, whether we're talking about mental health or we're talking about people who are, used to be in nursing homes more than they are now. The disparity between wages is continuing to grow. And I know that's a common complaint we get from providers, and that is the level of pay you get for the same job in state government versus what they're able to pay.
Well, the gap here, if you consider a home health agency, you probably have a lot higher wage than somebody working in an adult day.
Probably.
Maybe.
I think the average wage in the adult days is probably approaching what Bobby asked the question earlier, in the $12 to $13 range, and a home health agency, for the most part, will have paid more.
Well, but I can tell you it's not that much more.
It is in my count.
Well, I think the people that are in my home right now are getting about $14 an hour, maybe 13. It's not much.
Right. Well, in my county, my home health agency pays more than that. My adult day is $2 or $3 less.
Yeah, my only point, Rich, and
no,
committee
the
3% is not enough for these providers to keep staff.
I
And it's
totally-
unrealistic. And it's unrealistic. And I just think this budget's built on a house of cards.
Well, the
It's gonna come
3%,
crashing down on us
well,
in social services. This budget's built on a house of cards. It's going to come crashing down. That's what I've seen so far from the social service agencies because of the low pay.
I don't disagree.
I think we're all talking about the same thing, and that is workforce, the ability to attract workers that are key to providing the services. And what it in this rapidly changing labor market, these practices of very, very minimal increases are going to catch up with us. I think that's probably what we're all expressing in different ways. But I think for the purposes, it's much larger than Dale. It's in DCF, it's in mental health,
yeah,
et cetera.
I'm not
So
picking on Dale.
No, it's a broader concern.
But they got 6 positions for 600. They got 6 positions in administration for $671,000. And I go down here and a 3% increase for providers and choices for care. The total is 2.6 million. Our priorities are way off.
I think that, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to continue. I guess we can have a lot more discussion here. I think we probably need to just keep going through. And I don't mean to minimize or shorten this conversation, but I do think we are going to have to start setting some priorities in terms of what are our core services and how do we fund them and the adequacy of funding. And right now we've been able to supplement this, with provider stabilization, additional grants and federal money. But once that goes, there'll be some difficult situations that will emerge from this, more than what we're experiencing already.
Mhm.
So I'm going to suggest we keep going. I'm just looking at the clock, and I know that we've got still a long afternoon ahead of us. And now we're down to VR, and that's no proposed changes. And the federal money must be pretty stable then, because is that still an 80-20 match?
Actually, if I can just, we inadvertently skipped over the Developmental Services Appropriation.
Oh, I guess we should do IDDS.
Yeah, that's a big one. But actually, even before we do that, I want to just circle back to the question that you had posed about DBVI, Division for Blind and Visually Impaired. I was just going through my email because I had stated that we hadn't gotten a request, but I was thinking maybe I was incorrect about that. So I went through, I had gotten a request from the Vermont Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired to include funding for the SMART program. However, it was after the timelines for our budget development, so it was not anything that we could consider at that point. So I just want to correct the record on my misstatement from for that particular topic.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Certainly, we don't want to pass over developmental services. That's a big area of your budget.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So starting with the first item for developmental services, DS, we have caseload of an additional projection of 341 persons served. And that reflects a $7 million, just over a $7 million increase. The second line item is for Public Safety Act 248 caseload, an additional 13 persons served for about $896,000. And DS Public Safety and Act 248 caseload specifically, it serves persons who with a developmental disability who potentially present a danger to public safety, or who have been committed under Act 248 for being deemed not competent to stand trial due to their intellectual or developmental disability. So the costs for those services to serve those individuals tend to be more significant, which represents the difference in the annual figures there. The third item that we have here is it's an annual figure for budget versus actuals alignment of a decrease of $4.3 million. And this represents the nature of the fact that this appropriation is built on an accrual basis versus expenses on a cash basis. So if someone were to come in and start receiving services, say in March, they would only, we budget for their services on an annual basis, but they would only be receiving, 4 months worth of services in that year. And this is an annual process. The fourth item is, again, the ASME collective bargaining agreement annualization of $1 million, just over that. The fifth is
that would suggest that people are working for the 1205.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Wouldn't that suggest that they are working for the 1205 if you have to increase by $1 million? Obviously, if your base already reflected an average wage of $14, then that increase on the minimum would not result in $1 million additional cost, because you're already at a higher pay level in your base budget. So you must have people that are actually being moved from 1205 to 1280.
Bill, can I ask you to speak to the mechanics?
Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
we're currently under negotiation for a new ASME contract starting July of upcoming July. And so the change that's reflected here, 1205 to 1280, that's just annualizing the current CBA that goes through state fiscal year 22. Further adjustments for the CBA that's under current negotiation, that'll come at a later point.
And we'll see it in the budget adjustment.
Correct.
So can I
Yes,
ask,
Britt. Senator Westman.
so does that, what does that mean for an answer to Senator Kitchell's question? Does that reflect the fact that what you're dealing with here is just the increase at the base level salary? Or does this, do you use some of that $1 million to deal with those lower wage workers because you get wage compression when you up the base? So is it going into wage compression for some of the people that are just above that $12 and whatever an hour? Or is it just going, that $1 million just going into those people that are coming up?
It's to meet the obligation of the current agreed to collective bargaining agreement.
So in other words, I think that the question of whether there is a wage compression factor associated with it, I believe the answer is no. Yeah.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep moving us along here. If I don't mean to rush you, but this is probably be taking more time here.
Sure.
I had skipped over to VR and I realized that I had managed to skip over a big part of your budget. So
Sure, no worries. Just the next item in the DS appropriation is a relatively small amount of $16,000, and that is associated with an annual premium increase for workers' compensation for ARIS, the fiscal agent.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last item is $8.4 million, which represents a 3% rate, the 3% rate increase for home and community-based services for developmental services. And that concludes the changes in the DS appropriation. And then the, as noted, the VR appropriation does not have any proposed changes. And I think you had started to ask a question about that, Madam Chair.
Well, it's just till 2080 match.
I'm sorry, is for vocational rehabilitation?
Yes, there used to be a state match of, it was a 2080 match.
That's correct.
Okay. So obviously the federal money isn't changing at all because you don't need, the match isn't changing and you're living within that same appropriation.
So it might be worth mentioning that for both DBVI and VR, and Section 110 is the federal funding that you're referencing that is 80-20. What happens every August, and it's not base funding, is money that's returned across the nation.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
we can apply for it and get reallotment funding, which we
if
have.
the other state doesn't spend it, and we get that in transportation as well. So same thing. Okay, but then you have to have the 20%.
Correct. So our maintenance of effort is high enough that we can apply for the reallotment funding without having to ask for additional general fund.
All right, do we have another page to go to?
No, that is the changes. The rest is, summary by appropriation, et cetera, but we've gone through all of our proposed changes.
Okay. I'm going to bring up something. I had a meeting with folks. They were concerned about the requirement for conflict-free case management and the need to comply with that federal requirement. And of course, the local agencies this is once again getting into workforce and what they have for workforce capacity to take on, a requirement that has been out there for a number of years before you were commissioner. Can you just give us an update in terms of where you see that that issue now relative to meeting that federal requirement and the capacity of the DAs, SSAs to undertake that work?
Sure. So just to frame that issue a bit, we received notice from CMS in October, I believe it was, that the choice model, which we had previously proposed, I think earlier in 2021, although I could be mistaken on the exact date, that CMS did not agree with a choice model for conflict-free case management, and that in order for Vermont to be in compliance, we were going to have to establish a process by which the provider of healthcare or provider of home and community-based services could not also be the case manager for an individual due to potential conflict of interest. So we received that final word from CMS, I believe it was in October. And then subsequently AHS, who is leading the efforts on compliance with this, while Dale has a significant seat at that table, has submitted a proposed work plan to CMS in which that addresses very broadly that we will be in compliance with that rule within, I believe it's a 5-year span. So we're working, the agency collectively will be working between now and when we need to come in compliance with that rule to assure robust stakeholder engagement across our providers, across service recipients, to assure that we're able to come into compliance with the rule. As to how that will happen specifically, it's far too premature at this point to say. We're still lining up the plan of attack is not the right word, but the plan to come into compliance with that. But it looks to be, I believe it's a 5-year period. Megan, am I misremembering the time frame? Do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
5 years, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So that ties into the enhanced match and that $144 million bucket that got created between the match and the additional federal dollars that have drawn down. And you have allocated money for that. And the reason I'm asking is obviously the Disabilities Council has expressed concern about the delay and the implementation of that federal requirement and the extent to which the allocation of funding is sufficient to the task. And I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard that concern. I am sure that it would have been articulated to you directly and not just to me.
Yes, so I mean, I think the Agency of Human Services is managing both the 10% FMAP bump, the ARPA bump, as well as the overall agency compliance with the conflict of interest in case management rule. So in terms of any specific questions about the process for those, I would want to assure that the Secretary's office is at the table to answer any of those questions specifically.
Okay. But the Secretary's office is not operational. The department is, and that's why I was wondering, the extent to which you're involved in that. But you're saying that's being managed out of the Secretary's office?
Or the conflict of interest in case management?
Yes.
So DEVA actually has submitted the plan. I believe it was submitted by DEVA as the Medicaid entity. Is that correct, Megan?
Yes, that's correct. There's an overall plan because this topic goes between departments. It's not just Dale. And so the plan has been submitted and the plan is still very high level. So what we don't know, because as Commissioner White said, it's fairly early, is we do need to go through the stakeholder process to describe how we go about coming up with this conflict-free system, because there's several ways it could look. And each scenario has its own potential cost associated with it and process for transitioning. So we need to go through that stakeholder, and the connection to the home and community-based FMAP enhanced funding, as that will have support from that to engage with a contractor first to help us frame that up and get through that process. So right now we are literally writing that proposal for the contract phase with this coordinated effort between DEVA and the departments.
Okay, so Dale, so that corrective action is being done by the agency because it transcends multiple departments?
That's accurate to say, and Diva is leading the charge as it pertains to the conflict-free case management. But Dale, obviously, it has a significant impact on Dale services providers and service recipients. So we are absolutely at that table as this goes down the pathway over the next 5 years.
All right, I'm sure we'll be hearing more on that. So other questions? I realize it's hard to believe it's Friday afternoon and you're, I'm sure, looking forward to a break. And if there are no further questions at this point, I'm sure there'll be more as we go along, and Senator Westman will be spending time trying to understand more of the details of the budget and the issues that were and concerns that were expressed today. So with that, thank you. I don't see any further hands up, so I'm going to say thank you very much, and we'll move on to our next department. You're not even the last for today, so thank you. And I believe, Chrissy, we have Department of Mental Health.
Thank you.
We have the Department of Health. Dr. Levine will be joining us.
Okay, all right.
And they should be here any moment.
Okay, thank you.
Did we find out, Jane, in regards to their hiring of the compliance officers, and did they talk about that?
Yeah, they did, and that's what raised Senator Sears' question about adding more bureaucracy. Although those positions are there to do investigations and protect vulnerable, I mean, a lot of seniors, for example, are financially exploited and or physically neglected. And so there are investigations that or guardianships that have to be put in place. So it's not just that bureaucracy. It could be look like more positions, but they seem to be very much devoted toward protection of people with either intellectual disabilities or because of age.
Yeah.
So, but once again, I think that's one of the questions Senator Westman will have to pursue relative to, more positions there and spending there as opposed to, provider reimbursement or whatever. All right, it looks like Department of Health has arrived. It's hard to take. We've converted you into a department, huh? It's like depersonalizing. Welcome, Commissioner, and you have your deputy here, and I assume you have other staff. I understand Paul Daly he told me was still with the department, but just in a different position. So you have your your chief fiscal officer here as well?
Yes, Anna Swenson is our financial division director.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I apologize. We've kind of been bouncing around schedules. We're still trying to work on the BAA, and we had amendments to take up. So we appreciate, I think if we've rescheduled you and whatever your flexibility. So thank you for being here. And we're taking up your department's 23 budget request. And so I don't know how you want to proceed in terms of, are you going to do the presentation, Dr. Levine?
Yeah, I'm going to do 2/3 of the presentation, and my deputy is going to do the final third. And I guess I should introduce myself as always. Mark Levine, Commissioner of Health. It's great to see you all again. This is a committee that I remain very familiar with. The members have been here for a while.
Yeah, you could say we're a bunch of old timers. It's okay. I'll say it.
Now, Senator Baruth is new to the table.
But we collectively have a lot of institutional knowledge. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now, per my prior experience with this committee, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I will stay fairly high level and not do a line by line. That's more customary for the House committee.
Yes, we do leave it up to them to go line by line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I will do an overview of our department's budget and then I will review substantive changes in our 3 appropriations, which for administration and support involves our CDC Health Disparities Grant. For public health involves the same grant, plus the Vaccine Purchasing Program, Special Fund Purchasing Authority. And then for the ADAP section, which Deputy Commissioner Doherty will address, the Governor's Substance Use Disorder Initiative. So if I could start you on slide 2, which is the familiar pie chart. And I'll give you a second. Oh,
Yeah, we now have it.
Perfect. So the governor's budget recommendations for the health department provides full funding for all the department's pre-pandemic program activities. We do anticipate we'll still be dealing with the coronavirus after July 1, but for the purpose of our budget, it assumes most of the work will be done then by our epidemiology and immunization programs, and it will be augmented by additional staff funded by COVID-19 public health response grants. So right off the bat here, our budget proposal is almost $210 million across the 3 appropriations, which is an overall increase of 22.9%. What's driving that increase is mostly federal funding, as well as the governor's $8 million substance use disorder initiative targeting prevention, programming, and recovery services, which you'll hear about. Federal funds make up 49% of this year's fiscal year 23 budget. The fiscal year 22 budget, it was 45%. So the dollar increase is $26.1 million, which is a 34.4% increase. Pandemics have a wonderful way of helping us in that manner. The general fund in fiscal year 22 made up 9% of the department's budget. In fiscal year 23, that is 12%. That equates to a $9.1 million increase, which is 59.4% increase.
That's pretty substantial.
But you'll notice in the pie diagram, it's still a very small portion of the total pie.
Mhm.
So that's the broad overview before I get into the 3 appropriations. If there are no questions, I can move right into the first appropriation.
I think we can. Obviously, we're going to want to hear more about the $8 million increase. That's all general fund.
Yes.
And exactly what the plan is in, in that 8 million. Also, it's kind of interesting because that's a lot for prevention, and yet we're in the implementing this coming year the cannabis program, and I believe it's 30% of all the excise tax goes for prevention as well. So we will want to understand exactly what's being proposed here and the how it connects to Department of Mental Health, because so many people with substance use disorder have a co-occurring mental health condition. So that nexus is really important for us.
Yes.
as well.
And we will give a full description of the breakdown of that 8 million and the fact it's not just prevention, it's also recovery services. Mm-hmm. And we can discuss co-occurring disorders as well. The other part of that is I'm in the camp of don't count your money before you have it. So though we have the enthusiasm and the aspiration regarding the commercialization of cannabis, we don't have money in hand from that effort at all at this point. So starting in the administration and support appropriation, which is slide 3. We will pretty much not talk about anything in lines 1 through 12 and go right to line 13, which is our new CDC Health Disparities Grant and that's all increase in federal spending. This was approved by joint fiscal on October 22nd, and they'll also be spending on the next appropriation, public health, but we've broken it into these two appropriations because of the purpose of the money in each appropriation. So that's the only substantive change in the administration and support appropriation part of our budget. If I can move to slide 4, the public health appropriation, similar change is reflected in line 9 for the same grant.
So let me ask, are we showing the money twice, or is the 3 million on top of the 9?
Yeah, they're two separate,
Okay.
and they have to do with the various human resources and other expenditures from this grant.
Thank you.
If you look at line 8, that's an increase in special fund spending authority for the Vermont Vaccine Purchasing Program. Now, that's a program that many of you are probably remembering funds itself. So this is a request for increased spending authority only. Under the Vermont Vaccine Purchasing Program, the state purchases all the required recommended vaccines for children and adults at a reduced cost through CDC and distributes those vaccines to provider offices. The purchase of vaccines administered to those with private insurance is funded by a quarterly assessment to insurers with covered lives in Vermont. The reason that the additional special fund spending authority is needed is to fund program expenses due to increased vaccine cost and utilization. The fiscal year 2023 assessment rate set in April 2022 will ensure adequate revenue to fund program expenses in fiscal year 2023. This program increases vaccine access, reduces costs, and streamlines vaccine administration for both providers and insurers. That's all I have to say about the first two appropriations, and I'll pause here again in case there are questions.
I don't hear any familiar voices speak up. Okay.
We're trying
So
to
the
make this as streamlined and
I appreciate that.
comprehensible as possible.
Well, I think we understand, and the 3 million's coming from insurers, because this is, that's the revenue source of the special funds.
Yes.
Any questions? Otherwise, we'll go to your next slide.
Good, and here's where I will turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Kelly Doherty, and we'll get into some more detail about the governor's substance use disorder initiative.
Dr. Levine, good afternoon. Kelly Doherty, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Health, and here to talk to you about the $8 million initiative proposed by the governor for substance use disorder. So I'm on slide 5, which you can see there. And there are some of the same, increases or changes in the other appropriations related to staffing and salaries. So I won't go through those line by line, and we'll jump right to the substance use disorder initiative if that if that's what you would like.
Okay. Well, the others, we understand the personal services pretty well. So I guess the grants would be the place to focus.
The substance use disorder, the new money, the $8 million initiative?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So on line 5, you will see the $3.5 million proposed appropriation for prevention. And what the intent behind this appropriation is to develop a statewide prevention system in Vermont. So as you can see, I included for reference on slide 6, There are gaps in our existing prevention coalition infrastructure, and it's due to the fact that the federal funding just is not adequate for us to fund coalitions across the state. So this is where we currently have federally funded prevention coalitions in the state. I will note that there are 3 additional coalitions who obtained their own federal funding that are not reflected there since they don't flow through us. And those are in Windham, Chittenden, and Addison counties. So these prevention coalitions work with their communities to address risk factors for substance use, particularly among youth, working to decrease those risk factors, increase protective factors, focusing on, policy changes that can be made to discourage substance use and influencing social norms. So we would propose expanding these coalitions to be in every district in the state, every AHS district across the state. And it would allow us to provide state leadership regardless of how the coalitions are funded. So, and they would essentially be a network that could, they could draw on the experiences of each other, and we would provide the oversight and evaluation of their activities. And
the evaluation is rather interesting. You're saying we already have coalitions in place. So one would assume that that we're seeing fewer deaths, fewer, I don't know, what are your metrics that you're using that demonstrates the impact of the coalitions? I'm telling you, we're really struggling with where overall where the governor is spending money and the extent to which some of our core services like, direct care of our elderly or people with intellectual disabilities. And so when you get into an $8 million up, and we'll have more discussion, but I would assume then the areas that have coalition are showing better outcomes or the metrics relative to substance misuse than those that don't. But I don't know what else you're having. And is this where Monica is coming in as the Chief Prevention Officer as well?
So Monica came in as the Chief Prevention Officer as a result of Act 82 that was passed in 2019, which established the Substance Misuse Prevention Coalition. So she is involved, and we're in close contact with her around our prevention efforts. Although her position is looking more broadly at prevention, not just substance use prevention. So the intent of that position was really to look at prevention on a larger scale, of which substance use is just one piece.
Right.
So, and we have seen better outcomes in places where we have coalitions and where we have financial investment. And unfortunately, the federal funding that we receive for prevention, one, is inadequate and has, obviously by virtue of us not being able to fund activities statewide, and it's not predictable. And we have seen that when funding changes, and we saw a decrease in federal investment in prevention funding, that our indicators went in the wrong direction. So we do monitor data such as from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that I'm sure you're familiar with, that's done every other year with middle and high school students, as well as the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System and the National Survey on Drug Use and Health.
I'm familiar with the Youth Risk Survey. In fact, I had a parent who wrote me who was very unhappy that some of the nature of the questions and the fact that it's administered without parental permission. So I will forward that communication because I know that risk survey has been in place for many years and is used obviously as a way of guiding areas of focus or money. And but it obviously this is the first time I've ever had a complaint from a parent, but I'll share it with you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the prevention component?
Madam Chair.
Yes, certainly, Senator Westman.
So I see the new initiative and the new money coming in. What I'm interested in, I've heard from what's happening with the budget for recovery centers across the state.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the recovery centers are not specifically receiving funding from this new $8 million initiative. They did receive a $500,000 in one-time money last year through the COVID funding that was coming in to the state. And because it was one time, it was not continued this year, although they have had various increases in their base funding over the years.
But between last year and this proposed budget, is their budget level funded?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll probably have more discussion, won't we, Senator Westman?
I suspect we're going to.
Yeah. But we'll keep going through on this.
Okay, so line 6, this is a $3.7 million appropriation to support a few different things around substance use disorder treatment and recovery housing. So what we're looking at here is sort of diversifying the availability or the options for people in terms of residential treatment beds. So one of the challenges that we have in our residential treatment system is that the beds that we have for inpatient treatment are really higher level beds that provide sort of the highest level of care in a substance use residential setting. And what we're lacking are lower level beds that once people are sort of out of the acute phase of their treatment and don't need, for example, as much medical monitoring, but perhaps aren't ready to go back home or, go back to their community, to have lower level beds that don't provide as intense of clinical services, but still provide supportive services while the person continues to recover. And I want to use the analogy of the healthcare system. So if you go to the hospital for a surgery or an illness, they'll keep you in the hospital for as long as you need hospital level of care, but then they may discharge you to a subacute facility like a rehabilitation facility until you're ready to go home. It's sort of that same idea of stepping down to a lower level of care. So this would, this included in this $3.7 million appropriation are 15 new residential treatment beds of that lower level, as well as substance use disorder treatment beds for pregnant and parenting people. So people who don't access residential treatment because they can't have their children with them. So this would allow people to access treatment and have their children with them and have sort of family related services, supportive services embedded in them. And then finally, or actually not finally, I have 2 more things. We are also proposing 8 new sobering beds or detoxification beds in the state, primarily to serve folks who are perhaps living in recovery housing where it's a substance-free environment and it's a communal environment where all of the residents commit to not using substances. but we know that substance use disorder, that relapse is an expected part of recovery from substance use disorder. And when someone relapses and they're living in recovery housing, they can't stay because their relapse may put the other residents at risk for relapse. So these beds would be a very short-term solution for folks to go sort of get back on their feet, get reconnected to whatever services they might need, so that they could then potentially return to their recovery housing. And then finally, we are proposing the creation of additional recovery housing or recovery residences in Vermont at the tune of 36 new beds. There are many recovery houses in Vermont, but it's not adequate to meet the need. So those are included here as well. And like I said, those provide a supportive environment, doesn't involve clinical services, just a supportive, sober environment where people can live until they are more established in their recovery. And I will pause there to see if there are any questions.
Are you there, Senator Sears?
Well, just a quick comment. It always bothers me that we have, I understand the recovery system, but do they allow Suboxone in these houses? I mean, we're providing Suboxone to offenders who are in DOC custody, and then they get out and they need some place to live, and they may be addicted, but they're on Suboxone, and it seemed kind of counterintuitive that then they have to get off the Suboxone to live in the recovery house.
Right.
Is that changed at all?
Yeah, well, the recovery housing that we would support would allow people to remain on their medication-assisted treatment, whether that be methadone or Suboxone. Yeah, so there, we would only work with recovery housing providers that would allow that. There's nothing to, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Glad to hear.
There's nothing to stop someone from opening, hanging up a shingle and, opening up what they're calling a recovery house and not allowing that, but those are not the providers that we would work with.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Baruth, you had a question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I was
What
just,
about, so your sobering beds? Senator Sears, help me on this. The public inebriates that sometimes end up in jails where they really shouldn't be. Would they get assistance through these sobering beds?
Yeah, so that it would essentially be, sort of an expansion of the public inebriate. It could be an expansion of the public inebriate system. So I gave the example of somebody needing somewhere to go when they leave recovery housing, but these could certainly be used in the way that the existing public inebriate beds are used as well. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll go to the next line, which is a $270,000 appropriation for substance use disorder employment services. And this will help Vermonters in recovery access employment. We know that there's a huge workforce challenge here in Vermont and elsewhere, and people in recovery, if they get the appropriate support, could be sort of an arrow in the quiver of solving that problem, so to speak. So we know that being employed is one of the best predictors of positive outcomes for people who have substance use disorder. And this would specifically provide, would fund a targeted employment intervention through the Turning Point Center of Chittenden County. And what specifically it will provide is a full-time dedicated vocational rehabilitation counselor who would be based at the Turning Point Center to connect with people around employment. We would also fund a full-time person contracted with Vaybeer to provide job placement services, and then 0.5 FTE at the employee assistance program to work with employers by linking existing VOC Rehab and Department of Labor Services and supports to these folks. And the goal is to work with 100 individuals in recovery per year through this program.
Okay, so what I understand you to say is this would be to give additional resources and a dedicated vocational, so you're working with the VR division and the expertise they have with the labor market, and then you're working with Vayber, which also is part of that delivery system, and you're just making it more robust and providing a dedicated resource.
Correct.
Okay.
Any questions there?
Well, I'm very happy that you're focusing on marginalized Vermonters who are outside the workforce right now and trying to give them the supports to get them back, because, you know, we obviously get a lot of focus on importing the solution to our workforce problem, but some of us, myself particularly, have wanted to make sure that we are trying to do everything we can with our own human capital and potential workforce and not forget them. So this is nice to hear.
Great, thank you.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Alice.
Where is Jenna's house?
I'm just about to talk about that. So that is what is reflected in line 8. And Jenna's house, this would provide $500,000 in funding for Jenna's house, which is located in Johnson, Vermont. I'm sure Senator Westman is familiar with Jenna's house. They are an organization that is doing a lot of work in the Johnson area, and this funding specifically would support the operation of recovery housing, again, and employment assistance programs for people who are accessing services through Jenna's house. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions, and if people want to know more about what they are doing up there in Johnson, I can certainly describe that.
And let's, as I read the line, I thought the 500,000 was employment assistance, and that Jenna's house was part of the 270. But
No.
I think
Yeah, the 270 is specifically for the Turning Point Center-based Chittenden
oh, I
County.
see. I see. If you look very closely, there's a dotted line. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Yeah. So Jenna's house and employment assistance is all part of the 500.
Yes, it encompasses recovery housing and employment assistance at Jenna's house.
Okay.
But wait a minute. I thought you told me that you were hiring a VR person to go to Turning Point in Burlington.
Correct. That's for that's line 7.
So with 270, you're doing the VR counselor, you're doing the contract with Vayber, and one other thing.
The employee assistance program.
Yes. Okay. All right. And how many people for $500,000 on housing and employment assistance?
So ADAP is currently working with Jenna's house to fine tune their plan. But what I have here is that they would house 30 to 50 individuals per year in their recovery housing, and they would employ between 25 to 45 people in Johnson. They're developing their own sort of employment opportunities, and up to 50 in surrounding towns. So it could be up to 95 people for the employment program at Jenna's house, and up to 50 people in recovery housing at Jenna's house.
Okay, and that's already permitted and functioning.
They do have some housing up there already. And some of this funding will be for some of the supplies and equipment that they have. I don't know if these are, sorry, I'm just looking at their budget proposal here. So it will incorporate some staffing, some equipment, and housing assistance. So in other words, typically when you go into recovery housing, you know, you have to pay rent, but oftentimes there are stipends available so that until people get back on their feet and are able to get employment, they would provide some financial support for people for living there. And then also they budgeted some funds for necessities and transportation. So the units themselves already exist. They've purchased property.
I just know permitting seems to be a very significant challenge in many communities. That's why I was asking. We're experiencing it with the youth facility in Newbury. We're experiencing it with a facility that was a group home in Lindenville to now be used for IDDS clients, and all are getting Act 250 appeals. And so I was just wondering, that's why I'm asking about the status of this facility.
So I think you need to talk about the 500 is, and the funding will carry on for how long do you envision the 500?
For 3 years.
Okay. And I can say that they're planning on opening a coffee shop in what was an existing coffee shop, and they're rebuilding that. They have a store in what was building supply store, which was Park and Stearns. And I know they have housing above where the coffee shop was existing now. But this funding is envisioned in your plan for 3 years.
Well, it looks like it's base general funding.
It is.
Yes.
It's all general fund.
So I didn't see it was, now maybe it's transition to when the revenues start flowing for prevention services funded through the excise tax, you know, from cannabis. I don't know. Oh, well, that's up to you, Senator Westman, to ferret that out.
I will sort.
Okay.
I think Kelly and I are going to be talking.
Anytime.
I'm just going to say you need to reach out to me and email me, and then we'll figure out a time to.
Will do.
Okay, more slides?
Those are all the slides.
Oh, we are done through all the slides. Oh, okay. Now we can look at it, people's faces. Other questions of the commissioner? Or deputy or chief fiscal officer? You're lucky. Friday afternoons after the day we've had probably is we're kind of on the downside. So you may say, oh, gee, well, I'm very interested. On the other hand, we probably are not maybe as assertive in our questioning, but we'll rely certainly on the House. And I assume that Health and Welfare will be taking up testimony as well regarding your proposals. Other questions for folks from Department of Health this afternoon? Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for coming. You've been obviously had the last couple of years has certainly put a lot of emphasis on public health, and And there's a lot of work ahead. So thank you for all that you've done. And at this point, I'm going to suggest then we adjourn the committee for the week and for the day. And